Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we are going to be talking about some positive things for once. Yes, I know, right? Dread actually talking about positive things. People, for some reason, don't really like it when I criticize the game and be negative, but that's just mainly because, I actually like being honest when I talk to you guys. But to kind of change things around here, we're going to talk about two positive things that happened this patch that kind of saved Last Epoch for me. And I'll be honest, it probably saved Last Epoch overall. Now, these are things that you wouldn't necessarily understand or feel until you played the game for long enough, like I have. But they were definitely problems that were going to surface eventually. And I'm very thankful that EHG has fixed them before they cause any bigger problems. Now, if you haven't already, I'd heavily suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel, as that is the best way of currently supporting me and my work here on this channel, as, of course, shows me that you want to see more stuff like this. Now, let's talk about what I believe to be the best two changes. And we're going to ignore, in terms of problems, we're going to ignore the massive amount of bugs currently, and we're going to ignore the lack of endgame. Those are two problems that I still think plague the game currently, but there are two other problems that got fixed recently. Now, the first one is going to be the objective rushing meta that we had seen that was culminating over the past few years playing Last Epoch. If you don't know, before the factions existed, the main way of getting most of your gear was either killing bosses or by killing, killing objectives in the monoliths and to get through to those like echo reward nodes, right? And this kind of gameplay, it kind of enforced a way of playing that was very toxic, and that is mainly ignore all the monsters in the monolith and just beeline for the objective. Now, in my opinion, to make an ARPG great, you kind of want to have a reason to kill minions, right? There's kind of no point in playing an ARPG if you don't have a reason to kill minions, kill enemies in general. And that's one thing that always felt off for me specifically. So that's why I was very bummed about it, as technically the best way to farm back then was to slap on as much movement speed or teleport skills as possible on your character and to go as fast as possible. Now, of course, you are still incentivized to build movement speed and you're still incentivized to zoom a little bit, but you also have to kill monsters now. Why is that? Well, the factions release. If you don't know, the only way of progressing the factions and to gain favor is actually killing enemies. And of course, the higher in corruption you go, the more XP enemies drop, of course. That means that you get more favor per enemy killed. This means not only you're incentivized to go as far as you can, to kill as many monsters as you can for as much favor as you can, you're also just incentivized to kill things. Like whenever I'm walking through monoliths and stuff, I no longer feel punished for stopping to kill monsters. A lot of the times when I'd be streaming or recording, I felt like I had to actually dumb down my gameplay and actually play significantly slower than I normally would, just so that the video is actually entertaining, because no one wants to just see me running through a monolith without killing anything, right? That would be really freaking boring, right? And it was really boring. So whenever I would stream, I would dumb it down and just like relax and play at a slow pace and kill things, right? But now that, favor exists, it is actually, beneficial for you to kill things, because killing things indirectly gives you gear, and that is because of favor, right? Whether it be COF or Merchant's Guild. Merchant's Guild, you have more favor to sell and then buy, and you need favor for both of those things. And of course, for COF, you need favor to buy prophecies and to reroll prophecies, which of course directly equals more items, right? So killing monsters equals good, which is great, right? It's kind of something I was complaining about for a long time, and they finally fixed it. Now, whether or not they did it, because of the criticisms or not, or it just happened accidentally. Either way, it fixed a major problem that was going to be an issue in Last Epoch. Thankfully, it's fixed. Now, the other problem that had plagued last Epoch for a very long time is the boss damage reduction system. Now, if you don't know, EHG recently, what they did was they, not recently, a long time ago, they made it so that bosses take less damage based on how much damage you deal to them. This was mainly to curb out the amount of damage that players were getting to in the later patches after last Epoch, entered early access. And I'll be honest, it was a very poorly thought out system. Essentially, there was a point in your character where, like, investment of your character, where you stopped investing into damage and you started investing into tankiness, and significantly sooner than now in the current patch, and it felt really bad. After a while, it just felt punishing to actually build into damage. When you'd play a big bonky build, it felt punishing. When you played a build that did a very, very large amount of damage very fast, it felt punishing. So people stayed away from these, not necessarily glass cannons, but builds with higher numbers, mainly because, what's the point? It's better to just build tankier and just to survive the fight if you're going to be punished for dealing more damage. Now, the reason why the boss DR system was even needed in the first place, and EHG actually thought of this, was the lack of HP bosses had. So, for instance, the normal amount of corruption that most people push to, at least the casuals, they would push to around 300 corruption, right? Now, that would give bosses 150% more health and damage. That was the average of HP that most bosses had, because in the old system, most of the HP for bosses and stuff like that came from the modifiers from the map. But the thing is, you could cheese the modifiers in such a way where whenever you fought ore abysses or monolith bosses, you did not have to deal with modifiers that actually mattered. So you'd choose modifiers that didn't do anything, like chance to slow or anything, and you'd never have that massive 200% increased health and damage modifier that bosses could eventually get, right? And that's why a lot of my older footage, if you see, I actually stack as many modifiers on my bosses as possible in terms of damage mods, just to test my builds that much further. And now we don't have to worry about that anymore, because corruption has changed. Now, corruption as a baseline is the difficulty, decider, instead of the modifier for the most part. There are certainly still modifiers that still suck, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, that giant number there is the determination of how difficult your monolith is going to be. And this is interesting because instead of having bosses that have 150% more health and mobs in the monolith that have a gabillion health, you deal with bosses with 700% more health and damage and mobs with the same amount. This is very interesting, as boss damage reduction doesn't really matter anymore. It's gone for the most part. Don't get me wrong, it still exists, but if you're encountering boss damage reduction currently, there's two reasons for it. You have too much damage for the current content you're doing, i.e. corruption, or you're doing campaign, or two, you're playing a bugged build that is doing significantly more damage than it should ever do ever. Most builds, even builds that get 1 million DPS, 2 million DPS, I've even had builds that done 5 to 10 million DPS that have never encountered boss damage reduction because of the fact, I'll just push up higher in corruption and all of a sudden my boss has 800% more health and damage. And turns out, boss damage reduction doesn't really proc that much when he has that much HP. Like I said, that was not really something that existed last patch, because to get to those absurd numbers, you'd have to push so far and so high in corruption. I'll be honest, even I, as someone who plays day in and day out, I play as much last Epoch as almost anybody else. I probably play the most out of, I'm probably 1% when it comes to that. I play way too much of this game. Even as a person like that, I even was oh, that's not worth pushing to. Why would I ever push to 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 corruption? Eventually it gets boring, and I want to work on the next build. After a while, corruption didn't really feel like anything. So to get to those points of HP where boss damage reduction mattered, it would take significantly more effort than it did now. Now, I'll be honest, like going to 700 corruption feels like a breeze, like a walk in the park. And getting there and then not actually having to deal with boss damage reduction and actually being rewarded for stacking damage, because, you know, like at 700% more health and damage, you're going to need more damage than you normally have to kill bosses in a decent amount of time. So it actually feels great, especially with the, you know, the advent of the factions. It means you actually have better gear, so you have better ways of pushing your damage even further. So overall, those are the two biggest changes this patch that I didn't really think was going to make it. To be honest, I didn't really think it, but it did. Whether it be accidentally, whether they didn't mean for this to happen, or if this was like direct responses to, you know, criticism for the game. Either way, I don't really care. It's fixed the game for me for the most part. Obviously, like I said, there's the endgame stuff and the bug stuff, but those can be fixed in the future. The problems that I was talking about were fundamental issues with game design that have been fixed due to different fundamental changes in game design, i.e. the addition of the factions where killing monsters actually matter, and of course, giving bosses actual amounts of HP, so they're no longer, you know, like they no longer fall over with a, you know, a little bit of a breeze, right? So both those combination of changes has made the game significantly more fun, at least for me. Now, of course, like I said, a lot of other problems, we'll get to those, but I'm trying to be positive for this video. Now, with all that being said, this has been Dread, off to go do something else. Bye.